Hello everybody, thanks very much again for tuning in to another painting tutorial for EAVYLEAD Studios. This is Josh, the madman in Japan from the Crown of Command, and today we're going to bring you a classic regiment of all metal goblins. Thanks to my glorious bastards on Patreon, all of you, and especially to Matt W. and David Schooley, I am now in possession of a lot of these, if not all of them. So we're going to kick off the tutorials today with Nick Dat Banner Twat, and that's an affectionate name given to him by Azag the Slaughterer as part of Azag Slags. It's a new regiment I'm putting together for our games at Warhammer Renaissance here in Japan, and I'll be coming to a video battle report to you guys soon, so I hope you enjoy that. But let's get underway with our tutorial today. With Nick Dat ready now on our little painting handle, being sprayed all in glorious skull white, we're ready to place our base coat, which is going to be basically a dark green and yellow mix. We're going for a bit of a mid-tone painting here for the base colour of his skin. Normally I'd go from dark to light, but I thought we'd try something a little bit different. So we're going for a mid-tone green, so maybe you already have some paint that's equivalent to that sort of colour. Then we'll give him a nice dark green wash. I'm using Nostalgia 88 range, and of course that's been discontinued now from Warcolors, so just find a nice deep rich green. And then we're going to start applying some mid-tone highlights using the base colour we used before, once that green is all dry. Then we're going to add some nice skull white from Nostalgia 94 here into our base colour, and then we start applying these highlights. I really want the skin to be quite luminous and green, very vibrant, matching the era. And we just want to try to center our highlights around the edges, and then we can blend back into the skin using some of that green ink and giving us some nice, really smooth transitions. Defining the muscle tones on his little body. He's so cute and green, and such a little tiny little guy. Taking some green glaze now, we're going to use that to undercut all the shaded areas this time. I'm actually not using glaze as it really should be intended for in this case. I'm just going to use it as just a way to define more of those deeper shades on him, and he's looking pretty swish. I think Gork approves so far. So let's see what we're going to work on next. Now I'm going to take up my Vallejo Game Color Black using my new Vallejo brush, the Pro Modeler, on a size 0, which has been an excellent brush, a great acquisition, and I highly recommend that. And now we're just going to start outlining all the parts that aren't going to be green or different color and separating that from the actual flesh colors. Now I like to paint everything with non-metallic metals, so we can use Luftwaffe, World War II Grey and Pale Grey as our two main colors. Luftwaffe will be applied as a base coat, so everything that's going to be chainmail, his helmet, is going to be coated with that as a base coat to start off with. The little horns on the side are actually painted black, so we're going to give those a base coat of those. And for gold, I've got some heavy opaque colors, heavy gold brown and heavy brown, which I use as a base color for all the things that are going to be painted gold on this miniature. Now to highlight all the non-metallic silver or metal parts, I'm just adding pale grey to the World War II Luftwaffe grey, and then sort of just slowly blending in, just picking a very small area and increasing the volume of the highlights each time. I'm also going to put some beige and some ivory down on the palette, as we'll need that later for our gold. So like using the non-metallic silvers with the golds, you need to then start looking at making some mid-tones, so blending the two together, so the brown and the heavy ochre or heavy gold brown, whichever paint you have there, and mixing them together to create these nice mid-tones. It should be like around the center, around the base of each of the sections that you're painting in gold. I like using beige and I like using ivory as an alternative to white, so it's not that sort of stark highlight, it sort of just gradually builds up the highlights. And again, sort of centering those on really small areas. Don't go too broad with your brush strokes, otherwise everything will be that color. And finally, I just like adding some flesh wash as just a way to just enrich and enhance the gold colors on your non-metallic gold. And using pure ivory, I'm going to start putting some nice sharp highlights onto the gold here, just to give them more definition, just to sharpen it up and sort of tidy it up there at the end. For the blues, I'm adding dark Prussian blue and also enchanted blue, just to highlight the black initially. So just adding some dark blue to the black, just to get some nice sort of subtle highlights there, and adding some pale grey in there as well, just for the final highlights. I love using dark Prussian blue just as a base for all my blues, so I'm doing that for this little tassel that's at the bottom of the battle banner. I'd normally use Prussian blue, but because of this nostalgia and 90s period, I'm using enchanted blue for highlights. For the yellows, I'm using the beautiful Vallejo game color, silky smooth moon yellow. But before we do add that to any of the parts of the model, I just want to use the beige as kind of like a mask to mask over any sort of imperfections there. I want to make sure that's perfectly clean before we add any yellow, because any other color is going to show through there. And we're also going to put some bloody red on there as well, also from Game Color, the new Game Color range. Again, masking anything off that's going to be imperfections before we apply the red, and then that red will just go in there perfectly. They're really good paints from the new Game Color range from Vallejo. I've been very, very happy with the ones that I've been testing so far. Using some red and yellow glaze is going to make a nice orange there, because they don't make an orange in the glaze range for Nostalgia 94. I'm actually going to use that just for doing the highlights and for just smoothing out any of the transitions when I start highlighting up my reds. So I'm using that yellow mixed with the red to get a nice orange, and then using the glazes sort of to cut back to give a much more smoother, enriched color on any of the highlights on that banner icon and for his shoes and any other parts that are painted red. I added some heavy brown as the base color for all the teeth on the icon, and then used some beige and ivory to highlight those up. And for the eye patch on the icon, I used some more dark Prussian blue as a base, and then adding more pale grey to get some highlights. Nick Dak needed some eyes to see, so we added some beige as a base coat over the black initial base, and then added some red to pick those out, adding some more yellow just to pick out some more highlights there. I'm going to do some of these pimples, which I'm adding red to the green base, just so it sort of blends in nicer with the skin tone, and pick those out with some moon yellow. So for the leathers, I'm using Serpent Bite leather and also Dead Flesh from Vallejo and War Colors respectively, and I use that just to do those nice pale sort of leathery coats on the armband and for his bag sash around his waist. And then we're going to add some flat earth and brown ink for the base, back base of the icon on the top of the battle standard bearer. And I always like to go for the details last when I paint a miniature, so adding all those little things like little rivets or studs, things like earrings and bracelets, just picking those out. I use periscopes just finely, just with my really fine brush, just to line in between his fingers and any other areas like between his lips, just to give some extra definition. And then toward the very end, just sort of sharpening things up. We've got the base colors on there, we've got most of the highlights. Now just add those little finer dots of white or fine dots of ivory or whatever it might be, just to let it sort of spring out to life. And I think Gork is pretty happy. He's just missing one thing, and that's his glorious banner. So let's get on to that now. Okay, before we start anything, we need to measure exactly how high our banner is going to be, because the last thing we want to do is make a banner, get it painted, get it ready, cut it all out, and then stick it onto the banner and find out it's too wide in order to fit on the banner pole. I've actually custom made my banner pole because a lot of them came with these very, very short metal standards. So I did a video on converting one of those in my previous videos for EAVYLEAD. So go and check that out if you need to find out how I did it. But it's very simple. Anybody can do a very simple conversion like that. Once I've got the sizes and dimensions that I need, and I know the sort of overall length of how wide it's going to be, I start measuring that out on a piece of just sketchbook paper. Nothing too special, nothing too flash. I've got to work out how many spaces for each check and line it all out and draw them individually, because I don't want to be guessing that as I'm painting the banner. That's going to make it look very much out of whack. Things and squares will be just out of place and out of size. So I want to make sure all the measurements are correct and check and double check each one before we go to the next stage. Now with the design, I just looked at the army book for Orc and Goblins, and I wanted to check against the Eavy metal design they used in the studio and try to replicate something as close as I could to it. I'm not the best illustrator in the world, but I think if you just take some time and just give it a nice, simple, brief kind of outline, that's all you need. And then finally, using some varnish, gloss varnish I think is best. I did this, I covered all of the banner after outlining everything out with a Sharpie first, just to give me the actual boundaries of the banner, just to know where everything was. And once that varnish is dry, give it a couple of coats, and then I start lining in with the paint. Now, I recommend using inks with your paint, so if you're using black paint, use some black ink with your black paint. If you're painting something with bone, just get something like a brown ink or something like Flesh Wash that I used before, just so it thins it out, because it gives it a nice thin coat. You don't want it too laggy, too dry, and you want to be able to work with that paint consistently as you're painting your banner, making it nice and smooth, getting some nice transitions, because that gloss varnish will help you do that as well. It's got a nice glossy surface for you to work on. It's also protecting the paper so it doesn't become too absorbent, because if you don't have that varnish, the paint will absorb into the paper, and you'll get all that furry paper kind of feeling and texture to your banner, and you'll ruin it. So please make sure you varnish it first, and then you can just start painting away. Just take your time. Just enjoy this 2D art that you're creating. And I try to match it as closely as I could, keeping the paints nice and thinned out on my wet palette, trying to brush in one direction if I could. For things like flames and really small intricate designs, I would just use a Draftsman pen or Sharpie. I've got a 0.3 pen that I use, and at the end I realized, oh my god, I made a massive mistake. I put the design on the wrong side. So as I said, please check everything as you go. So I made another one, and the one I made initially that was a mistake, I'm going to send to Matt for his goblins, but I had to go back and then make a new one. I did that, I cut it out, I glued it with some PVA, and as that was setting, I used the handle of my brush just to curl the paper in the shape I wanted, and there you go. There he is, Nick Dat, Banner Twat. I hope you enjoyed this video. I really enjoyed making it for you guys, for my patrons, and for people here who support me on YouTube. Thank you again to my glorious bastards, my Storm Boys, who support me every month. And if you're interested in painting tutorials on my Patreon or for a commission, please contact me at EAVYLEAD@gmail.com. Thanks very much for watching.